All right, let's start with compositions, framing, some basic design rules that I will always want and implement. Let's sketch some ideas out. So usually I will try to keep this process as simple as I can because I just tend to get easily overwhelmed. So before I will jump into Blender, I will want to have certain things already figured out. So as an example, let's imagine there is a client that asking us or asking me to come up with an image about a river and a castle and a castle. So immediately what I will start thinking about is the horizon line. Because the horizon line will dictate what I want to, will dictate basically our framing. So if the image will be about, if I want to make an image about a river, I will immediately go with a high horizon line. If the image will be about a castle, a huge castle, I will go with a lower horizon line. If an image is about a castle and a river, then I will go with horizon line maybe somewhere in here or somewhere over here. Like what I will always also like try and avoid is splitting my image in half. So never halves. It's like this composition. It are rules that applies to your compositions, and the same rule applies to your design choices. But I will talk about never halves or never make any two intervals the same in a second. So if the image will be about a river, then I want for my river to fill the frame. I want for my river to be the biggest element in the frame. If the image is about a castle, then I want to create huge as castle. I'm sorry, if the ask is about huge as castle, then I want to create this huge castle and I want for it to fill my frame. This is my most important object. And it's most important because it's extremely big. It's the biggest one in the frame. But even that said, the size of the shapes of the objects will dictate like the priority, but also the light too. So what would also work in here, for example, if this castle is in shadow, right? And then our sky is dark, so the silhouette of the castle is blending, and then we get to see the character in here, and it's being lit by the silhouetted by the sunlight. Then obviously, our character like will be more noticeable than the castle, right? Now the third one will be a castle. Girdas towers, and there's a river leading to this castle, right? So those are like the first, this is like the first rule I will think about when I will get a brief. Hey, what the image is about, right? If the image is about a river, I really want to show the river, because for the longest time I was like struggling a lot with composition. I still do, but I was just like spending sometimes like up to a couple of weeks working on like personal images, because I had like my whole scene was super busy with like gribbly elements, with a lot of models, and I was only thinking like, hey, specularity is the most fucking important thing ever. And like the framing, the basic composition like wasn't there at all. So for example, for the longest time, what I would do, I remember I was working on an image that was like showing a moon surface, and there was supposed to be a base on the moon surface. So I went with a lower horizon line. I created a base in the distance in there. I placed my dude in here, and then I've created the moon. So the moon was this size, the base was this size, and my character was this size. So I wanted to show everything. And by that, I showed nothing, and I made like the image extremely boring. Because what you always want to avoid, what I always want to avoid, is making the elements, my focal points, the same size. Because, well, it just makes for a boring image, and it takes away from the depth. Now, not to say, I mean, if you want to make an image about a castle, right? Just not a huge castle, like a regular castle, then for sure we can go with something like this, and then place it like higher in the picture or lower to show it in the first. So here's our castle, right? And then there's like some leading lines leading to that castle. So that's totally allowed too. I'm not saying like those are the only rules I'm sticking with. It's just that this is like the basic sets of rules that I will keep in mind when I'm starting to work on an image. But it's not to say that I won't like lean away from them a bit if I need to. But for sure, I want to focus on my objects to make them bigger in a frame if they're like, for example, my focal point, or like just to like put more attention by framing certain objects. So for example, now when if I were to approach this image about a dude, a base, and a moon, maybe I'll want to start with an image about, I'll want to focus the image more about the dude. So immediately I would make this dude this big in the frame, and he's almost touching the top of the frame. And then there's a base in the distance, and then there's the moon this small, right? Now, if I want to make the image more about the base, then the base could be like bigger and our dude is smaller. So like here, and then like there's moon, or like I can fake, I know the moon isn't like this big, right? But I want for sure either character or moon to be bigger or smaller, right? So I know like from moon, the earth is like, I'm sorry, yeah, the earth from moon is this big, but also I've seen like in some movies where someone was like faking the shot, as in that's totally allowed, where the character was standing in here and the moon was this big. Or maybe that's like what happens. I don't know. I've never been to the moon. I only watch the movies. So let's talk about other examples. So, or let's talk about what I would do next after I have like figured out my horizon line. Now that I have somewhat figured out my horizon line, and I'm not like, it's not an idea set in stone, I will still like fly around with camera in Blender and try and explore different shots, but I'm already kind of like in this mindset of, hey, there are certain things that I will try out first, and then I will like try and additional ideas. But before jumping into Blender, I will still think about what compositional rules I want to implement before like building the scene. So, for example, in the past, when I was working on an image with a castle and a river, or like any image, like what I would do is I would place my character, and then I would just start randomly placing some. I would just start placing some random shit in my image. So I would add this tree in the foreground, which was extremely heavy, and then I would another tree, like so, in here. So what I was like doing, and I wasn't like aware of it, is I was so afraid of implementing any like compositional rules that I was like limiting my framing, limiting my real estate I can work with. So for example, if there is a huge tree, what the hell is going on? If there is a huge tree in here and there's another huge tree in here, then there's like no real estate for me to implement any compositional rules in here. So easily my framing could be this, just this, right? So, or this is the only space I have to work with now. So so not to, I mean, also I don't want, I'm not saying that, hey, you can't place heavy objects in your foreground, because those can act as well as your like your compositional choice. I was not using it like as one. So for example, I remember there was this shot in the new Game of Thrones where there was just like this 2/3 of the images were covered by this mountain wall, and it was cutting out the image in 2/3, like so. And then there was a character, wait, like so. And then there was this, and there was a small cliff, there was a path, and then there was a small character in here, and then there was like some structure over here, right? So this is totally fine, and that's totally allowed, like, just to be clear, right? So what I'm saying is that I would just place random stuff in my shot that were like blocking me or my real estate I could work with. And then on top of that, if I've added the trees in there, I wouldn't add them in the distance. So what I'm getting at is, if I will want to introduce an object, it's not a tree, it's a shape. It's my compositional tool that I will want to, for example, use to push and add depth. So if I want to do a shot, I will place maybe some trees near the castle, and I want to group them. Another rule, compositional rule, that I will want to implement will be grouping of shapes or value grouping. But first, let's talk about repetition. So this is my first compositional rule that I will always want to try and implement for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is because obviously it makes the composition more juicy, but the other one is, if I spend some time like modeling some stuff in Blender, or if I introduce like an element into my scene, then goddammit, I already spent the time. Like, why not repeat it a bunch of times, right? It's so always like so important that when you put into effort into something, you really want to show it. So yeah, I'm like sidetracking again, but um, like so often, sometimes I will bump into artworks where someone was like creating this spreadsheet where he was like showcase, all right, I've prepared this character and I've done this and then this belt and then this belt and like this haircut, and then suddenly the character is like this small in the frame, right? So you really want to find a frame where you will frame your actually character in the environment, right? So because you want to show, like you want to brag about all of the effort you've put in, and if the character is this big, like no one gets to appreciate it. Come on. But yeah, let's talk about the compositional rules. Let's get back to the topic. So first rule will be repetition. Repetition. So I will start adding a bunch of trees. My trees are becoming my compositional tools. So I will start like placing them in the distance, and then maybe I will place them like some in here, some in there, right? And then maybe there could be like one in here, like something in here. So the elements by adding repetition, and I'll be showing like some examples as well on how it applies to like urban environments. I'm just talking about the trees and castle because I'm used to talk about trees and castles. So I will want to use repetition to create depth in my image, right? So, and also I will want to be aware between the spacing of the objects. So there is another rule that I will want to implement, which is never halves. Or never make any two intervals the same. So just to like simplify. If I will want to make an image where there's like a bunch of ruins, scattered ruins, so what I won't do is, because they're standing on the ground, because I don't want for them to be too high, then I'm already thinking about, but I want them touching the frame, then I already start thinking about, hey, the horizon line needs to be high, because if the ruins aren't too big and the horizon line is super small, super low, then they like this will be they won't be feeling the frame, right? And again, like there can be a shot when there is just a ground plane, there's a bunch of ruins and there's like some beautiful sky, right? That's totally allowed too. It's just that I'm like trying to make some choices instead of like, I don't know, going blind. So I will go with higher horizon line, and then I will place some ruins in here, for example, right? And then I will want to place some other ruins into my distance. But I'm already like kind of I'm creating a problem, as in the distances between this, I mean, not this, they're like the same. So I want to avoid it. So some of the ruins, they should be closer to the camera, they should be bigger, right? Then I will place another one with some shrubbery around, like in there. And then what I will do, I will maybe place last pieces of ruins over there or over there, or maybe I could like move this over here. Let's do it one more time. Ruins, shrubbery, ruins, shrubbery, and then I can place maybe another one over there, right? So because what I would usually do is I would place my ruins over there, I would place my ruins over there, and then I would place the third ones over there. So the distance between this object and this object is the same. So all you have to do, or all I had to do, is to move it over here. And this already like works better, because also there will be like more and more elements. And not to say, I mean, obviously when we are designing urban environments, then like the floors are even. So sometimes they might create like even distances or like halves, a bunch of halves. So it's not always like avoidable, but just like trying to be aware of it, it will really like push your image. And obviously it should appear maybe a bit smaller going into the distance, right? So what else? So repetition, never halves. The other thing will be leading lines. If there is a river, like river is super easy, right? If you are working on an urban environment, there can be, I know I tend to use cables, a lot of cables, and they always like try to the cables are so easy to do, and we'll cover it. We'll talk about doing cables super quick soon, but I'll add a bunch of cables that are like leading, right? Or I was thinking about like doing a shot with a canal, and I will talk about the canal in a second, so we'll get back to the leading lines. Now the fourth rule will be grouping of shapes. Grouping of shapes, or value grouping. So grouping of shapes and value grouping. Those are like two rules, obviously. When it comes to grouping of shapes, if I will introduce a bunch of trees, I'll want to create some visible rhythms, I would say. Maybe rhythms isn't like a good word for it. What I want to do is avoid. I want to imitate nature, of course, and I want to avoid creating like random noise. So what I would used to do, I was like create a bunch of, like there's a single tree and there's a single tree over there, and I place it in the middle. You see, so our brain likes to do halves. Like we need to like just keep like reminding. I need to keep reminding myself that, God damn it, dude. No, yes. Like add small elements and just like random. Like, but now, what I want to do is if there's like a bunch of trees, they start with like some small shrubbery, and there's bigger trees, and there's this fall off. Like fall offs, or you know, when we look at top view, if there's a shape, there are like smaller ones surrounding it, and they're getting smaller and smaller, and like there's more distance between them. So I'm like trying to create this rhythm, right? And it doesn't have to be like as dramatic like the shapes. There could be like bigger difference between the shapes. Oh, and the shapes, I mean, come on. I need to talk about big, medium, small, but I will talk about it in a second. So I'll create a bunch of shapes in here, and then like somewhere else, right? Now, at some point, stuff might get like, the values might start mixing in. And one thing that I will always want to avoid is sometimes something that like, it's like totally valid option to do, and something that like a lot of us are used to doing is to be able to push the reads. I would avoid coming up with a character that's like the darkest element in the in terms of value, and then as stuff recedes into the distance, it gets like lighter and lighter, and there's a castle in there, right? And then we add a bunch of background mountains, and they're like getting lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. So that's a great way to push and make clear reads. But also, if like this was the only way I was approaching the images, and pretty fast it like turned out that, hey, I'm like limiting myself in terms of like what other compositional rules I can implement, because also when it comes, for example, to area perspective, it works in a bunch of different ways. So instead of like trying to do this, what I would start doing is try to group the shapes first, and then possibly group them by values, right? So they really like stand out. And obviously this shape and this shape, they can have slightly like different values, right? Now, it also helps when like you want to go crazy with I don't know, like a bunch more like organic shapes, and they're like overlapping, right? This should be bigger. This is too small. The other thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to grouping of shapes and value grouping, and I talked about it briefly, is, and I can't stress enough how important it is, just like with the tree, when you bring an element into your image, it becomes your compositional tool. So for example, if I'm creating a river, and maybe there are like some lilies or lily pads scattered along the river, I'm not like placing them randomly, like and feeling it busy. I have like this rhythmical shape, and then I want to create some other shapes within this shape. So if this is our river from top view, top view, so just an S-curve, like so. I don't want to like dribble it up. What I want to do is add a bunch of lily pads, and they're like grouped together. And then there's this set fall off I was talking about, right? And then there's like another ones, and they're near the shore. So I'm kind of also making sense out of it. The other reason why value grouping is so important is to our eyes, or what our eyes love and what our brain loves, is when we are looking at something, we want to be able to clearly recognize what we are looking at. So if the terrain is like different I know, like value or hue or different like brightness, and then we get to see a bunch of lilies that look and feel different than the terrain, and then we see the water that feels different than the lilies. We are able instantly to recognize it. And when there's like just a bunch of noise or like a bunch of like choices where there's a lot of stuff going on, it kind of creates like this slight discomfort. So obviously, I mean, there can be like ambiguous shapes when there is like a lot of noise, but also it's like a tool we want to use. It's also, it can be like a compositional choice. But when you are talking about images like that, when there is, for example, nature, if there's like a lot of random elements, then our eye will get confused, and our eyes they hate being confused, because then our brain needs to start figuring out what the hell is going on. So it won't be as attractive as, for example, an image where we look at it and we instantly, oh, so there's a bunch of trees, and the trees, they feel different in value and in shape than the next thing next to it, and they're used in a way where they are adding depth and pushing depth into our image, right? So